Today's topic is find good fit funders for your volunteer program in under 60 minutes. And so we have an awesome guest with Rachel here, but I'll introduce her here in a sec. Myself, my name is Gung. For those of you that haven't joined us in the past, I'm the CEO and co-founder here at Civic Champs. We're a volunteer management software platform, and so a little bit of background on me here on the right. But I think we'll skip most of that. I'll just say that I haven't been in the nonprofit space until Civic Champs, and so have been really enjoying the last 5 years serving the sector. It's my favorite thus far. I used to work in more corporate environments, and so excited to be part of this community now. So, but with that, let me turn it over to Rachel. She is the events and community manager at Instrumentl, one of our very awesome partners that we love to work with. They're absolutely fantastic, and I think Rachel's going to give you all a really terrific webinar today. And so I'll let Rachel, you introduce a little bit more about yourself.
Thanks, Gung. I really appreciate it. I'm going to swap the screen share so I can advance my slides here. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be with you, and thanks for taking time out of your busy Thursdays, wherever you might be, to chat with me. I'm actually glad we have an intimate group here today because I can spend a little bit more time focusing in on maybe some of what you're most curious about when you signed up for this webinar. I'd love to hear about maybe some of the challenges that you're having in this area or the wins, and talk about that together and how I might be able to support you in kind of the learnings that we're doing today. But before we get to that, a quick intro of who I am. My name is Rachel Fidler-Canella. I am the events and community manager at Instrumentl, as Gung already mentioned. I am a Southern California native, but I've bopped around a little bit and spent most of my career in the nonprofit space. I have a decade plus of experience working in museums specifically, starting with the Portland Children's Museum, then spending about half a decade at the Holocaust Museum here in Los Angeles, and ending with the School Programs Department at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, where I oversaw 2 museum sites, NHM and the La Brea Tar Pits, for those who may be familiar with that paleontological site in LA as well. I also love that you all incorporate volunteering into your intros, and I'm a big fan of music. It's something that's a passion of mine on the side, and I'm a part of a community band in my local neighborhood, and I volunteer with So Far Sounds, which is a live concert series run by volunteers. So thanks again for having me. I want to tell you a little bit about our journey today, and then in the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about hopefully some helpful ways you might be thinking about these problems that we face when we're approaching our grant-seeking journeys. So I'm going to start with a quick intro, explain a little bit about why grants are so powerful, kind of what the power they have, and how you can activate that power through your grant-seeking process. We're going to talk a little bit about prospect research, essentially what it is, but also how to become an expert eye in prospect researching. I'll then kind of walk you through how you might evaluate an opportunity with a funder to see if they're the right funder for you. I have kind of these key questions that you'll be able to consider when you're looking through funders. And then I'll talk a little bit about how you can actually find those funders, make sure you're finding relevant funding opportunities. Lastly, I'll just wrap up with a quick recap and takeaways. And since I am coming to you from Instrumentl, I'll talk a little bit about how Instrumentl specifically can help you with your grant-seeking endeavors. So yeah, we're going to be together for about an hour. I'll kind of run this presentation for the next 40 minutes, and then I'd love to incorporate any questions that you might have. Please feel free to continue to put stuff in the chat as well as we go, and I'll try and answer questions along the way. I know Chloe and Gung will be helping with sending a recording out, so don't worry if you don't capture everything. I have a couple of good slides with questions that you might want to screenshot if it's like easier for you to reference that later, but you will get everything after the program. And then, yeah, I always want to make sure everyone's honoring their personal needs. I've got my water glass here, so making sure everybody stays hydrated. And I have some freebies to give you at the very end, so I hope you'll stick it out to the hour. I know everyone's very busy, got a lot on their schedules, but please do spend time with us to the end. I can share how you can get this freebie today. Speaking of that, the freebie that we have available is the 7 proven tactics on winning volunteer grants. So this is a neat little guide that'll help give you some specific tips on cultivating corporate sponsorships for volunteer programs. So I'll be sharing that at the end of our program today. To get us started, I'm just curious kind of who's in the room. And I don't know if Chloe, you can help me launch the poll, or I'm happy to do that on my end. I just have 3 kind of simple questions. Oh, awesome. Thank you. So my first question for you all is, how would you describe your grant writing expertise? You might be a novice, intermediate, or expert. Do you currently use Instrumentl if you're familiar with the platform? Yes or no? And then what do you find most challenging around grants? Where to look for grants, finding relevant and applicable funders, standing out to funders and applications, or something else? And if you put something else to that last question, I would love to see that in the chat. I always make sure to document that so we can get a sense of what are some of those great challenges that folks are facing when they're looking at applying for grants. Oh, thanks, Hillary. I'm so glad to hear that. I'll give folks maybe like 10 more seconds. It looks like we have actually almost everybody responded here. Oh, awesome. Okay, we can probably end our poll. Cool. Great, and I'll share those results too. It looks like most of us are novices, which is great. I've got a lot of great tips for those who are kind of in the beginning of their grant seeking journey. But for those who are intermediate and expert, I know that there's going to be some tips that you'll be able to take from this as well. So I hope you'll also maybe share some of your lived experiences with other folks in the room so we can learn from each other. It looks like a lot of you haven't had the opportunity to use Instrumentl yet, or maybe you've tried it, but would be interested in trying again. So I'm glad to share a little bit more about what Instrumentl is for grant seeking. And then, yeah, challenges. It looks like we have a tie between where to look for grants and finding relevant and applicable funders, which is great because I think I can cover both of those things today with the content we have at hand. So thanks for sharing that insightful feedback. For some of the something else's, yeah, Hillary wrote, staff in development are too busy to find funders for our volunteer program, especially recognition. Yeah, I see that as something that I think probably others are facing as well. And we'll maybe talk about how you can strategize with your team, making sure when you're actually looking for grant opportunities, if you have the bandwidth to be applying for them, like why you think you should be advocating for certain funding opportunities over others. I'll talk a little bit about that prioritization later in the program. Cool. So let's just start with a little bit about grants. And since we've got some kind of newer folks in the room to the grant seeking world, I just want to talk a little bit about why grants are so powerful. So grants are actually absolutely worth the effort. I know it can be a huge lift for folks, and for our experts in the room, I'm sure you've spent many a night with the candle burning at both ends trying to get an application done. But they really are a super powerful tool for your organization. There are more than 87,000 grant makers out there looking to fund different opportunities. And we have 15,000 funding opportunities in Instrumentl alone, and that's just on our database. We're adding a few hundred a week. So these opportunities are coming up constantly. And that just goes to show you at a macro level, there is so much opportunity, regardless of the project you might be working on. As we get into the more niche specificity of our volunteer programs, I'll talk a little bit about how you might be discerning, certain funding opportunities over others. But on a macro scale, there's a lot of funds out there. And I often hear from people that they maybe struggle to expand their search for funding outside of the kind of local opportunities or maybe smaller donors that you're more familiar with. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. The most important thing to understand are the kind of broad set of funding opportunities that come with grants, right? So you might be looking for broad generic funding like general operating, or if you want to do something more specific with that funding, say, for example, your volunteer program, you might need to think about the different categories of funding that you're looking for. So things like, education and outreach, projects and programs. I know for some folks, volunteer programs show up a lot when they're looking for capacity building grants. So how you might expand the capacity, essentially the output that your organization is able to do might rely on being able to bolster your volunteer program. So looking for opportunities that specifically are tagged with capacity building might give you a little bit more of that narrow focus for your funding. For example, you might need new computers for an after-school program or something like that. You might find a less competitive grant than a general fund, right? If you're looking for more niche opportunities. So making sure before you're applying for the grant that you're really looking at the strategy behind what kind of programming are you actually trying to fund. As a general rule, private foundations must make a charitable payout in grants and other qualifying operating expenses totaling of at least 5% of their total assets annually to remain in compliance with federal and state tax codes. So if we follow the minimum distribution rule, that means that 5% of their average market value of net investment assets needs to be distributed. And a bulk of those distributions go to grants. And I'll talk a little bit about an example of how this works with a community foundation in New York. So if we take a look at a funder like the New York Community Trust, this is from the foundation directory in Instrumentl, we can see that their total assets as of the IRS filing in 2022 totals to almost $3 billion. So you can see this in Instrumentl. You can also find this in their 990. I'm sure for our experts and intermediate grant seekers in the room, you've probably done a lot of 990 evaluation. But this information is pulled here from Instrumentl. If we follow the minimum distribution rule here, and they're making charitable payouts of 5% of their total assets, that means that this foundation is distributing around $147 million of funding annually. And that's just this one example, right? So some might say, okay, great, that's just 1 year. But another reason that grants are so powerful is that foundations are usually super consistent with their giving. And actually, that's something that you can see from 990s. That's also something that we pull up in our funder reports in Instrumentl. So one thing in Instrumentl you can see is there are multiple year horizons where they're funding repeat grantees. This kind of takes me to this next point, which is what I love about grants, is that they can be systemized. There can be clear steps you can take to make sure that you're prioritizing your strategy when you're making choices about what applications you should be submitting, what funders you should be pursuing, essentially how you should be spending your time so that you're not wasting time going after funders who maybe aren't good fits, who maybe aren't giving to new grantees, for example. And grants can help your organization increase its organizational accountability. So that just means that, it can help you build a longer term funding strategy rather than being reliant on maybe the same donors giving a certain amount every year. You can have this fodder for other programming that you might need support for, financial support for. So what I want to talk about is, of course, we know grants are great. They're awesome. How do we get them? How do we find them? And how do we get them, right? So the first big step in finding grants is prospect research. And I'm going to go through a couple of tips to kind of elevate your prospect research from beyond just using maybe our beloved Google searches to find local funding opportunities to get a little more advanced in our grant seeking. So we're going to talk about prospect research specifically in the context of grants. This is obviously a broad term in the world of nonprofit fundraising, but for grants, this is really the process of finding, assessing, and qualifying public, private, and corporate foundations to pursue more strategic and planned giving. I will emphasize that strategic and planned aspect of this. Just because I know it can feel a little bit sometimes like shiny object syndrome where we're looking for opportunities constantly. The idea with prospect research is that we're strategically seeking out specific funding opportunities. With a good prospect research system in place or plan in place, organizations can hopefully get away from being more reactive. So instead you have that kind of steady influx of funds and that you can actually focus on the work at hand rather than feeling like you're chasing down opportunities. So prospect research is super important. And I really like this quote from Network for Good. Virtually every nonprofit has high capacity donors hiding in plain sight. Whopping of 40% of donors in a recent study admitted they could give more than they currently are. Our job as fundraisers is to identify those prospects so we can start moving them up to greater levels of giving. So really, we're trying to get involved in something that already exists. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're trying to basically bolster our funding opportunities that maybe even are right in front of us. And this actually reminds me of a client we talked to not that long ago who was telling us that they started their own nonprofit and they started looking for grants. And actually using Instrumentl, they found this organization that had been volunteering with them for years and actually made grants. Like they didn't understand that the organization that had already been like giving them time, right, also gave funds. And so they knew the program or the organization had done all this great programming, but they didn't realize that they had this specific capacity. And that happens really often, I find. So why we put so much importance, on the prospecting piece is because there really could be more funds just right in your backyard. And in this instance, in this example, this person actually had already a close relationship with a board member of this organization and was able to have what we call like a warm introduction, right? They're not cold calling this organization as they submitted their grant proposal. So we want to prospect effectively, give our organizations the best chance to get the funding we need. And thinking strategically about these things might give you the upper hand. So I'm curious, I've been sharing a lot already. I would love to hear from folks. I know we've got some newbies in the room. How are you currently looking for your potential funders? If you wouldn't mind just sharing some ideas in the chat, I'd love to hear kind of where are we finding prospective funders out there? Give folks a few moments. You might be, oh yeah, Gang, do you want to add in some thoughts?
No, I was just saying as folks are typing, building on sort of what you're saying, one of the missed opportunities I find is often these corporate matching grants. So if you have big corporate groups that come in, oftentimes, especially if they're big national brands like a Walmart or someone like that, they actually all typically have these programs where they'll match the hours that they've donated to with an actual check, right? And so maybe it's $5, $10, $15 per hour. So sometimes that can be a great opportunity as well. So, but I think that Pam has submitted something.
Yeah, so it looks like Pam shared that the development director uses a grant database system. Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that's definitely something they might be using. Something like GrantStation or yeah, Candid has a directory as well. Karen said, we do use double the donation for volunteer matching hours and dollars. That's great. Yeah, that kind of goes back to that kind of compounding on your own donations and your own volunteerism. Pam, for specific funders, it's mostly through networking or word of mouth. Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a consistent thing across the board here. Tara said, I'm new to my position. Our director has applied for the grants we receive. I feel like there are more out there and want to learn this process. Yeah, it can always kind of feel like, you're going for what you can find, but you don't know what you don't know. And not necessarily being able to have access to all your best options might make you feel a little bit like you're missing out on some things that might really work well for your programs. Awesome. Yeah, I'd say pretty consistently we have folks saying like, yeah, my board members or my leadership are making those connections, or like I'm Googling, or I'm using like a listserv or something. It can feel a little disjointed and I sometimes feel like it doesn't have a super strategic approach. So I'm going to kind of give you a couple of ideas of how you can hone in your prospect research, and elevate yourself up to the kind of level of an expert here. My main goal with this slide is to get you in the know. Think about how you can use publicly accessible information about funders to really like bolster your understanding of what's out there. So yeah, there's a lot of information out there, and I'm not sure everybody really knows what information is available. Does anyone have ideas about some of the fields that you might be able to learn about funders? Does anyone have thoughts what information is available on funders? Can share some ideas. Think about what information you might want to know about funders. So one of the first things that we're going to want to look for when we're looking at funders is their key stats on assets and their giving patterns. All of this information that can be found in their 990s, right? Yeah, exactly, Karen. I'll occasionally check foundation tax filings to see who they're already funded. That's a great point. And that's another thing that we're going to look for here too. So yeah, we want to look at their assets and key giving. That's something that will help us kind of determine that 5% rule when we talked about the minimum distribution, and get a clearer picture of the trend line on what their giving patterns look like year over year. Another thing we can look for is who works there. Who are the key people, the trustees, the members of the board, the founders. This can help us figure out if we can get an introduction or a warm up in that relationship. I always, when I find key individuals, I'll cross-reference my LinkedIn. I find that that's like a great networking tool. I'm sure many of you are using that to see if you have mutual connections and you might be able to do some sort of warm intro through that. We also want to look at their giving trends and cycles over the years. So looking at past grantees, like Karen was saying, and seeing what types of projects were funded, the type of funding that it was, and see if there's overlap with the projects that you're looking to get funded and the ones they've already given to. Because again, we want to like not reinvent the wheel. We don't want to go to a funder and be like, yeah, I see you've been funding healthcare and now I want you to fund animal rescue services or something like that. That's just not generally going to happen. So making sure you can feel informed ahead of time on their giving trends. Yeah, so the list of past grantees and funded projects. You can actually see what organizations have been funded by the same foundation in the past and how much they've given that organization. And that kind of leads into the geographic areas of focus. You'll find that some funders are not funding programs in Montana. Maybe they're very focused on, I don't know, California or North Dakota or something. That also is going to give you a clue if they're going to be more likely to give you funding or not. And the last thing is overall grant eligibility. This is something that I think gets overlooked sometimes till the very end, but making sure you're actually eligible for the grant in the first place, and being able to kind of pull out that key info super quickly so that you're not spending a ton of time reviewing a full request for proposals, RFP, so you can get to the point of actually writing and submitting the grant. So what might this look like in practice? I'm going to give you a quick kind of case study here of an example. This is the Cliff Family Foundation, and this is a digitized 990 form for this family foundation, and this is what it looks like in Instrumentl. So you can kind of see how we break down the 990 information here. I'll put a link in the chat too if you want to jump ahead of me and actually start looking yourself in Instrumentl. You can actually see what these directory pages look like for funders. And I'm going to walk through some of that in just a moment. But essentially what we did is digitize the bulk of information from both the RFP that's available, the request for proposals that's available on the funder's website, and the 990 so that you can pull information. It's not kind of your like old school PDF that you're kind of squinting to read through. And you can see info like the key assets, the total giving that they've done, their median grant amount. This information will give you a clue as to if this is a right opportunity for you when you're doing your prospect research. You can also see, yeah, their grant amounts over time. So if, for example, we're looking for a funding opportunity that is closer to $50,000, this might not be an opportunity that we want to pursue. It may not be worth our precious time because it looks like the median giving that this foundation is focused on is more around $5,000 to $6,500, right? So they're doing smaller scale programming. You can look and see, right? They're not giving large grant amounts. So that just gives us a better idea, a little snapshot of what they're giving right now. And then, as Karen mentioned, this is so important. You can also see these giving trends and where they've given before. So just getting a sense first of geographic focus, you can see that this family foundation does focus a lot of their grant giving in California, but it looks like they've also covered a lot of the United States here. They've given 5,000 awards. So you can actually look through and see each year what they gave and who they gave to. And you can actually even reach out to some of these organizations and ask them, what was it like working with that funder? What programs did they fund? What were their experiences overall? Can they give you any tips on what might be helpful in a grant application when working with this funder? always think activating the network of other fundies is a great way to kind of elevate your prospect researching. So I've gone through a lot already. We're almost halfway there. I've gone through kind of why grants are so powerful, and the high level of how we approach prospect researching. I want to kind of get to the meat of when we decide to move forward. How are we evaluating if a funder is right for us? Because gosh, a lot of funders might look great on paper, and then we might dive in a little further and see, actually, maybe there isn't a ton of alignment here, and I might not want to spend my time working on an application. So I don't know if folks want to share. I can kind of move forward with my slides. If you have any thoughts about what is your kind of green light, what do you look for to decide if a funding opportunity is going to be right for your program? You can share your ideas in the chat. If there's anything that stands out to you when you're looking at funding opportunities. And I'll go back to those comments in just a sec. But to move us forward, I want to get you to become experts in this funder prospecting. And so I have some specific questions that I always ask myself when I'm looking at a funding opportunity and I decide if it's a go or no go. What questions am I going to ask to make sure that this is the right opportunity? And I'm estimating that these questions will help you decide in less than 3 minutes whether or not a funder is right for your program. So kind of giving you that like quick overview of, hey, go or no go, like this is the right thing or not. Karen shared if there's time to apply, if it's general operating or program specific, and if it's worth the time to apply. Absolutely. Yeah. Karen's a fortune teller because they've given us some of our important questions that we need to be asking. Okay, so these are the 5 questions that I would consider when you're evaluating funders, first focusing on funder giving history. Number 1, are there at least 3 previously funded organizations that are like yours? At least 3. Is your organization's geographic location represented historically? Number 3, what percentage of those funded are new grantees? If they are giving their general trends, or maybe 30% or more are to new grantees, those are pretty good odds. I think as we start to get to the 30, 20, maybe only 10% are going to new grantees, those are really competitive opportunities. So thinking about whether or not it's going to be worth going for it. And then the last question here, has the funder been giving to more new grantees over time or more to repeat grantees? Because of course their goal is also, they're sustaining their existing grantees, but they also want to maybe bring on new grantees as well. So looking at that trend over time. I'm sorry, I've dropped a question from here. I'm not sure why that happened. I'll make sure to follow up on that if I need to with my slides here. But so the 5 questions for RFP review when you're looking at the request for proposals. First, what is the grant maker's mission and does it align with your initiatives? The second here, what are the specific goals of the grant RFP, making sure they align with your programmatic goals as well. Number 3, do you meet the eligibility requirements of this RFP? Number 4, like Karen mentioned, what's the size of grants being made and does it align with your budget needs? You might not want $500 and it's going to take a little bit of time to write this application, right? So making sure it actually aligns with that. And just number 5, what type of grant is this opportunity for? Making sure that that's aligned as well. And lastly, these 3 questions I think are perhaps the most important. It's your internal capacity assessment. And some of you spoke of having development teams. Some of you might be like a one-person show, or maybe you have like a contracted grant writer. But these are 3 questions you should be always asking yourself before you're applying for a grant. The first being, does your nonprofit have enough bandwidth to take on this application? Big question. On average, we've heard that about 70% of grant seekers say it takes 10 or more hours to get an application fully prepared. And that's just one application. So think about if you have enough bandwidth to be going for these. Depending on the complexity of the application, it might change your answer to this. Number 2, can you meet the reporting requirements outlined by the funder? These are so important and sometimes get overlooked until you've gotten the award, and then you're like, gosh, we have a lot of evaluation we need to be doing. that the program team needs to be aware of, and we haven't even like looped them in on this yet. So thinking about that in advance and being strategic there. And then lastly, does this RFP have aspects where your nonprofit can repurpose past grant proposals? In Instrumentl, we have this great document library where you can essentially upload like your mission statement and impact reports or impact statements from program participants. Maybe you have volunteers that have volunteered with you for a decade and they have these great quotes. Making sure you have all that information handy and that the application process can really speed up. We actually are also launching a new like AI submissions tool coming up, and it's actually going to take in some of your like past written proposals and be able to like automatically upload your words essentially, but like into new applications as you apply for them. So if anyone is an Instrumentl customer, you'll actually get access to that in the next month or so. We're launching that. It's pretty cool. Okay, and then my last tip before I kind of pivot into this next section here. This is all like you're preparing to apply for the grant, right? You're going through all this work to make sure your funder thinks you're super special and awesome. You should make sure you're discoverable. If the funder or their admin is going on your website, is it clear what your mission is immediately and how you measure your impact? Is it easy to find things like detailed case studies of your impact, along with contact information for folks at your organization? And this is also where I'd say, are you sharing testimonials and statistics from your volunteers? All of your organizations probably rely heavily on volunteers. So how are they being represented on your website? And I actually want to pass it over to Gung for a second here, because I think the statistics that you can gather and metrics you can gather from an application like Civic Champs could actually inform your grant applications and help funders see the impact of your volunteers.
Yeah, no, thank you. And so, yeah, for those of you that might be unfamiliar with Civic Champs, we're here to do a number of things, right? In terms of helping folks across the full life cycle of that volunteer journey. One of the things, of course, is collecting volunteer statistics. So what you're looking at here on this screen is sort of our check-in screen. And so it's a mobile app that you're looking at. We also have other ways like a kiosk or, admins can track hours, but that's one of the basic metrics, right? So you on the mobile, right, as a volunteer, you can hit that big blue button to hit check-in. It looks around to see what you're doing, and it says, oh, you must be here for volunteer onboarding. And so you click that, and then it starts this little timer for you, right? And so it's a really easy way to track hours. That'll automatically sign people out, things like that. And then we go to the next slide real quickly, Rachel. Yeah, and so then another metric that we like to track that I think is pretty rare is actually how happy were your volunteers, right? So your volunteer satisfaction, right? And so were they happy or unhappy? And so from a retention standpoint, I think this is important for you personally, but also if you think about grant funders, they want to know that you're creating something that has sustainability, right? So knowing that A, you track it is already important. Right, and then B, right, you can actually show, from A to B, your trajectory, your growth over time as well, right? And then we'll go to the next slide here. And so, of course, none of this matters unless you can see the data and report on it in an easy way. So this is our backend dashboard. At the very top, you can see we have some key metrics. And then if you're mousing over the comments, or you can see the smiley faces, right, you can kind of get this nice snapshot of what's going on in your Civic Champs environment, right? And so hopefully these are some nice stats. You can see individual hours by each row there as well. And so that's how we can help with metrics. And then,
Awesome.
yeah, I'll sort of turn it back over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Gung. Yeah, so having those metrics and making sure they're visible to your potential funders is super important. You can include these stats in your annual reports, and you can send those to prospective funders, or maybe you have a great newsletter that goes out. Having metrics like this can be really helpful. So my last little spiel here is about how you can start to find these funders. We've talked a lot about kind of the background strategy behind why and when you should be maybe looking for and applying for grants. But where can we find the best fit funders for us? I mean, I find the easiest way is Instrumentl. I mean, that I'm biased here, but I'll show you a little bit about how you can kind of dive in deep on Instrumentl and see all those. Even if you're maybe not a development director at your organization, you'll have a chance to get in behind the scenes and get a sense of what is out there, so that if there is an opportunity to share that information with your advancement or development team, you can be the one to be the hero and send them all this great info. There are, of course, other alternatives. You can be Googling, doing the funder website search. I know there's a lot of local funders that are looking to fund. You might know some of those already and be using their websites to keep track of RFPs or dates for letters of intent, LOIs. You can also do that digging through the 990 forms, like I talked about, through GuideStar or the IRS. And you can also use other paid databases or listservs to get this information about where to find funders. Why I think Instrumentl is a great tool. One of the benefits, or some of the benefits here, is just that it's helping you save a ton of time. I find that folks are running on fumes sometimes here in the nonprofit sphere. I have spent many years kind of feeling that, and wanting to help you stay focused and save time so that you're not wasting time looking for opportunities or tracking your grant opportunities. Instrumentl keeps that all in place. There's also a really cool matching algorithm that I'll show you how that works. It's going to basically like auto source good fit funders for each project. So depending on what you might be looking to fund, say it is, for example, your volunteer program, you can see that Instrumentl will search those parameters for you and then pull up relevant grants so that you don't have to dig through hundreds of thousands of opportunities to find the right one. Yeah, and access to your best options. So we do have that really robust database of 15,000 grants and growing from public and private funding resources. So you'll see that when I do a quick little demo here. If you create an account while I'm showing you, I'll do like a demo and you can just watch, or you can follow along with me. If you create your own, you'll actually leave here with a list of good fit funders ready for you, and they'll be tailor-made, so like bespoke to what your program that you're funding is. You'll leave with like an organized grant tracker, and you can even upload your existing spreadsheets if you have like your precious Excel spreadsheets that you're keeping currently your grant tracking in. It'll help you auto-populate with your funder history if you have examples of past funding. And you'll also be able to see the automatic deadline reminders with tasks that are customized to each funding opportunity. So that's another thing that I really love. I find sometimes it's really hard when funders have like a different date every year that they're releasing their opportunity, right? And you're like looking at the website and refreshing it every couple of weeks and it hasn't updated yet. Instrumentl will do that for you, and it'll tell you when the grant has been released or the RFP has been released, and you can submit that application. So if you want to take a go at this, I encourage you to use the link to sign up. This is actually like a special link I made just for this event. It skips some of the demo like onboarding that we usually do with Instrumentl. You can of course request that after if you want a one-on-one with one of my team members. But if you click that event, it should take you to the home page, and it'll ask you to just fill out like a basic information about who you are, your organization, your email, all that stuff. And then you'll be able to start your free 2-week trial. I'll show you a little bit about what that looks like. But essentially what I'm doing here is just filling out my information. And the link I gave you will allow you to skip an onboarding call. So this is like a special in-event link that we don't usually share outside of our live programs. So yeah, this is super basic stuff. I'm just filling out my information. If you want to follow along on your own screen, you are welcome to. I'm just indicating information about what I am. I'm a 501c3 nonprofit. This example, I was a Save the Turtles organization. I kind of have fun thinking of different nonprofits I can think of for these examples. And I've indicated my annual revenue, if I have 501c3 status, and how many grants I've won in the past year. So I've selected 1 to 5. Then this page will come up. This is where I've given you the option to select skip down at the bottom. I'm going to just change my slides here so you can see that. So yeah, you can skip this. This is something that usually you can't move past, but I've allowed everybody to do that here. And then I'll show you a little bit of how I set up a project that's related to volunteer programs specifically. This is about like a minute, like rapid fire review of what it looks like to set up a project in Instrumentl. But essentially right now I'm in my tracker. I'm going to go in and I'll set up a new project. When you set up your first one, it'll jump you right to this page that you can start inputting your information. I'm looking at funding my volunteer program. And actually, I think for this example, I'm a museum. I made myself like a local arts museum in my neighborhood. I have indicated I'm not a faith-based organization and I'm serving a specific area inside the United States. I'm based in Los Angeles, so I've indicated here that I'm focused on serving Los Angeles County. So I'll do that and select that option. And then the most important, I think, indication when you're setting up your first project is your fields of work. This is what Instrumentl is using to kind of activate that magic matching algorithm system. It's using NTEE codes from funders to basically match your project with funding opportunities. So being specific here is great, but I also would say only start with usually like 2 to 5, 3 possible fields of work so that you're not narrowing yourself down too much or being too broad, and then you're sorting through hundreds of matches. I did want to see professional arts and culture organization grants here. I've also indicated the size of grants, going back to Karen's point, like if she's only looking for grants that are 5K and above, then it's only going to show you 5K and above. And then lastly, what I'm going to use these funds for, since this was a volunteer program, I indicated education and outreach and project or program. I could have probably indicated capacity building here as well. And what kind of funders you'd like to see grants from. You might be only looking for private funders, or maybe you're really interested in federal or state grants. You can sort by that as well when you're setting up your project, or you can filter that once you've got your matches. And so, yeah, this is basically Instrumentl just finding this information for me. It's found 225 related grants. Now I've got to do a little bit of work to make sure that they actually align, right? I've still got to ask all those questions that I outlined before, but it's at least narrowed me down and given me a ton of great opportunities. I'll basically be looking at each of these matches. Instrumentl has pulled, I'll pause here for a second. It's pulled information from the RFP, and you can see that it's indicating the matches for fields of work. So I didn't see, there wasn't a volunteer program specific one here, but there was arts and culture access and youth involvement in the arts. So I did end up moving forward on that one. Oops, sorry, I backed us up here. Play, please. So yeah, I can just look at a quick overview of what the RFP is sharing. And I think for this one, I wrote myself an opportunity note and said, like, this looks interesting, but I maybe need a little more time. Yeah, I think so too. Having come from this world, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe my organization didn't use this for so many years. Yeah, so I said to myself, like, I need to explore this more. This is great too. If you have multiple team members using Instrumentl, you can see that then like, oh, Rachel indicated that this was interesting and now she's researching this opportunity. You can also, this is my last example here before I move on. You can also take a quick peek at the funder history. I was showing you that kind of funder snapshot. If I scroll over to this other tab, now I'm looking at the total giving, all that information from the 990, information about key people, all that jazz. Giving average and median. This is just giving you that like quick snapshot of like, hey, okay, I should be able to tell whether or not this information is going to be helpful for me and I'm going to be able to apply for this grant or not. And here's where we've got all those past grantees. You can click through to some of these. So these organizations have links where you can actually click through and reach out to those folks or look more into their organizations. And you can see this is a pretty competitive opportunity, right? I was saying that anything below 30% starts to be a little more competitive. They're only giving 10% of awards to new grantees based on the past 2 years of data. So, oh yeah, Hillary, that's a great question. I'll share about that in just a sec. Oh, and then the last thing here, yeah, it's got the NTEE codes as well, so you can actually make sure there's alignment with your program. And I just wrote another little opportunity note for myself and saved that into my project. So that was like, again, a rapid fire overview of how this basically like all the things I shared with you is wrapped into the platform here. It makes it a little bit easier for your team to kind of see what's out there. Hillary, I'll share the pricing page for you. There's a kind of tiered option depending on how many projects you might want to have. Each project is basically what you're looking to fund. So for example, you might have, I use that example like the computers for classrooms project. That's a really specific tech-based project, right? You're looking for like, I need actual like hard assets delivered to my classrooms. So that would be a specific project where you'd be looking for tech supplies, maybe it's education, maybe you're partnering with a school, and then maybe you have a separate project for a different funding opportunity, like your volunteer program or training for your staff. That would be another project. So it might depend for your development team how many projects they anticipate having, and that will impact the pricing. But I'll share that in the chat as well for anyone that might be interested in exploring that more. And before I move on this, I would honestly say, like, for some folks, Instrumentl is great for where they're at in their grant seeking. And for some folks, like, they don't quite have the grant seeking strategy set up yet in order to make this a viable option for them right now. And I would say, like, use the 2 weeks to explore and see if it fits in with your current strategy. Some organizations need to do a little more work to prep themselves up. Maybe they need to have won a couple of grants in order to feel like this is worth the investment. So I'd use the 2 weeks to your full potential. I have like a 14-day trial guide too, if you want to see like what exactly you should explore in those 2 weeks to make sure you're really getting a sense of what's in there. So yeah, my quick learning takeaways for you all. Grants are a great way to diversify your funding. We want to make sure we're getting that relevant funding. We're finding the best fit options by reviewing information about our funders before you spend all that precious time rating applications. And that lastly, Instrumentl does a lot of the heavy lifting of finding new funders that are most relevant to your programs. I've done a lot of work with organizations recently who have said they've saved up to 15 hours per week using Instrumentl, which is a lot of time. So I think just like having some of that automated process happen right in front of you is really helpful when you don't have much time to actually get the grants written. So thank you so much for spending time with me today. If you learned something new, I'd love for you to join us. We have a really great program coming up in April. We're doing like a big spring virtual summit where we're exploring kind of what the grant world looks like right now and how we could improve it. If you have colleagues in the advancement or development departments who might be interested, you can scan this virtual QR code here, or I'll drop a link in the chat. This just has all of our upcoming webinars. So anything that you might want to join us for. We actually have a really great grant writer, Meredith Noble, joining us the first week of April to do a demo too. So we have like experts come in and give their advice as well. So please feel free to join our list. We'd love to have you join us for other programs. And then, yeah, here's my contact information and Gung's as well. Oh, thank you for doing that. Yeah, if you want to email me, if you have any specific questions for your organization, or maybe you're like, I'm not the person that should be like diving into this, but I know some colleagues that would really benefit, feel free to send them my information. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn, anything like that. I'd be happy to help and talk with anybody about what might be a good fit for you. Any questions that I didn't get to? I think I saw most folks sharing here, but if I'll take a pause for a second because I know there's a lot of information and see if there's anything more I can share.
Yeah, that was awesome. Yeah, if there's anyone that has additional questions, please put that in chat. But I'll take sort of this moment though to just thank you, Rachel, for sharing all of this with everyone. I feel like I always learn something new. I've heard this presentation before, but I think you all always add new features and things that make it even easier, and obviously the tips as you all are learning, right? I feel like I'm getting the latest and greatest, so I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Well,
Happy to share.
Yeah.
I'll keep like an eye on the chat in case there are any other questions that come up. But as a reminder, we have this little freebie from Instrumentl today. I'm going to drop that in the chat. Thank you for sticking it out to the end with us. This is specifically focused on, how you might find volunteer grants and leverage corporate sponsorships here. So that is in the chat. Thank you, Hillary. It was really great to be with you. I'll drop that in the chat again, just in case. And then I think there's a Civic Champs resource as well. And I can advance that to the next slide here.
Yeah, and so, we have our ebook here, Unlocking the Power of Volunteers. And so if it's helpful, right, sometimes, even for folks that have lots of experience, it might be a way to get some food for thought, if you will, right? So across, whether that's recruitment, whether that's tracking, whether that's onboarding, retention, we try to talk a little bit about each of those, main buckets. So if folks are interested, right, you can scan the QR code for that ebook, but it's also in the chat as well. Great. And then the last thing here, right, is of course for all our webinar attendees, we have a little bit of a special here, right, in terms of 2 months free for anyone that signs up to do a demo with us. And so yeah, we will sort of hold that offer through mid-April.
Very cool.
Yeah, with that, I guess I think we'll call it a wrap for today. Thank you again, Rachel, so much for joining us. Thanks for everyone for coming on today. We're going to take a little bit of a break in terms of upcoming webinars on the Civic Champs end. I think we got 2 weeks that we're going to do a little gap here, just to sort of upgrade on what we're going to be doing coming forward. So be on the lookout for our next webinar in 3 weeks, and then we'll sort of continue the weekly cadence after that. So, all right, thanks everyone.
Thanks again. Nice to meet you.